Hello and welcome to week 2 of Exploring and Enhancing Employability. So our learning outcomes this week are to explain the recruitment process in more detail, and then particularly in the classes to practice some job seeking activities, and we will also understand the roles of assignments 2 and 3. So the structure of the lecture is we look at the recruitment process in more details, in particular CVs and cover letters. Then explain resilience and the numbers game and how to plan a strategy, and then some advice on just bouncing back. And then an overall briefing on assignments 2 and 3 and how that fits into the overall recruitment process. So we'll kick off with the recruitment process and just a resume of what we covered last week. So career paths in the 21st century are more likely to be longer. So retirement is pushed out to the 80s or so, or 70s certainly. And then because transitions are more frequent and more disruptive, we have new technologies and new events in the business world that come around. It's likely that people are going to have to reinvent themselves several times over the course of a career. So you're going to invent yourself for the first time here at Brooks, and then reinvent yourself 5, 10, 15 years down the line, and again and again, as the business environment changes. And we move perhaps to lifelong learning as well. Okay, so that's career paths in the 21st century. And then just to summarize the numbers game, yes, these are illustrative numbers. Here we might have 1,000 people seeing a job. 200 people start applying for the job, only 100 actually manage to finish the business of applying for the job, and then possibly only 4 or 5 will get called for an interview. So straight away that's a 96% failure rate for most of people. And then even if you get called for an interview, probably there's only a 25% chance of getting a job, so a 75% chance of failing at that stage. So it's pretty grim in that sense, and you will get rejected. So it's not a case of if I get rejected, but when you will get rejected, and by how many people, and how you develop the resilience to bounce back from that. So let's look at the cycle of hunting for a job. So we kick off with the thing we're talking about today, CVs and your general LinkedIn profile, which you should polish and buff up. And so that's what we'll be starting to do today. And we want you to finish it in the next couple of weeks, because you're also going to be busy doing other things as well next week. So you polish your CV, your LinkedIn profile, and you decide what target areas you want to go into. And then, yes, you end up scanning the sky. You're looking across the whole thing. Who is involved in this sector that I'm interested in, and who could potentially have any kind of a job for me. And then you see some particular jobs coming out, and so you start to home in on those much more closely and start to read the small print of what's in the jobs. And then you start to do some background research before you just blindly apply, a little bit of rough research and so on, and you think, well, that might be quite a good one. And of course, given the numbers, you don't want to be too picky. In other words, well, even if I don't want necessarily, that's not my first choice of firm or job, I shouldn't be too picky. Let's just go for it and start the process. Okay, so then you have to write an individual cover letter for that particular job. We'll come up to that in a moment. Staple on, metaphorically, your standard CV or attach it, and then off it goes and apply. And we've got something to say about that too. And then, yes, you wait nervously. I can remember waiting for letters in the post, hoping that, I was going to get a job or so on. And when that letter, when we're talking about a physical letter, it's one of two forms. It's either what we call the fat letter, which is great news because, yes, you've been selected for an interview, or yes, you've actually got the job. And then there's other forms from HR for you to fill in, or if you're being called for interview, well, here's where you need to come for an interview, and this kind of thing. Okay, and metaphor, and I mean electronically it would be the same. There'd be a lot of details. Or you get a thin letter, and the thin letter has just, in effect, one cover letter, like short letter, and it sort of says in the first paragraph, thank you for applying for this job, and then the second paragraph begins, unfortunately, and you can almost stop reading there because that means you haven't got the job or the interview. So you either get, and most of the time you get the unfortunately letter or email or message, and of course that is assuming that the people bother to respond to you at all. So you do, in fact, have to chase people up and say, I did apply for this job, what's happened? And that is quite a large part of the business of applying for a job. Or, of course, you might be called for an interview, and that's great news. If you don't get called for an interview, well, you've got to reflect on it, if necessary, refine your CV, perhaps, and this is the bit about resilience, that you really have to push on and not be deterred by the pain barrier of all that rejection. Okay, and remember, it's very similar. I mean, actors have to get used to this, and if you're an actor, it's very, very personal. You have been rejected in favour of somebody else. It's very tough. Okay, but they've all had to do it. Okay, so that's the job hunt cycle. But let's also consider, and you need to be vaguely aware of this, in fact, quite acutely aware of the fact that the employers have a process themselves. And that starts when some operating unit, some bit, says we need some people. Okay, so they take a decision to hire one or more people. They check out a job description, dust one off from an old one or whatever, write a new one, send it off to HR. HR then goes and places some job adverts in appropriate forums, okay, with these job descriptions or the essence of them put in. They then wait, hundreds of CVs or letters arrive, and then the process of sifting begins, and that's quite intense. But it's also given to really quite low-level people. You'd be shocked sometimes at the number of people who are making really very important decisions, and they're not the most senior person in the HR department. In fact, they're the most junior. They can be, a school leaver, or Lord help us, someone on work experience from school. So, your career hangs by a very junior person making an instant decision because they've been told, here's 100 CVs, whittle them down to 30 or 25 or something, exclude anyone who doesn't have a driving license or can't speak French or hasn't got an A-level in, whatever. And, you don't know that, but these people are just given that job and do it, and then you can get rejected at that stage. So the reject letters go out, and then they call people for interview, and then they have rejects from interviews, as we've already talked about. We may have another round of interviews or assessment centre days where they do a variety of tests for people, and that can be before the interviews or after them. But anyway, there's a rejection process from these. And then finally, they've decided on these are the people they're going to accept. So they write what's called a job offer, and that then goes out. And then at that point, it's out of their control because it's back in your hands if you're the lucky person who's got the job offer. And then they wait until they've got the acceptances, and then their next job in HR is to dig up an employment contract and send it off to you and get you to sign it, or that might have gone with the job offer. And then they've got to plan the process of bringing you on board in the company, onboarding as it's called, induction programs for you, and then there's a probation period of possibly 3 months, and then a permanent hire. And that's all standard HR stuff. Okay, so how do the two cycles work together? Well, the firm takes a decision to hire people and then it goes out to adverts. You then respond, see the adverts, send in your CV and cover letter, then goes through the sifting process where the two of you really mesh. And then, there's a 96% or quite high chance of rejection. And you've got to get used to that. And that's where the resilience really needs to build up. And then you try it again. Another firm advertises a job. You search, you see, you send off your CV and cover letter. You may get rejected at that stage. You may get called for an interview. Oh, that's very good. But of course, you might get rejected. However, what you really want is the pot of gold at the end, which is the job offer. And that's a result. Yeah, finally, that's what you really want. Okay, and then you write back and you say, yes, I'd like to accept the job and I'm ready to start work. Okay, so that's the overall process for starting a job here.